Financial Forte, Financial Forte.
Never ceases to make me smile. Here I am with my bestest chum, Mr. Alessandro Forte. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno Paolo.
Samba bene. Valpolicella, Pinot Grigio, and Carne.
Do you know what? One thing that never changes on this show, Paul, is I do have serious concerns about your mental health.
I think that's fair. Anyway, so welcome to Financial Forte with Paul and Sandro. And today we're having a bit of fun. So those of you who actually exist in social media land would have seen my fun banner, which has a beautiful picture of Sandro looking very smart and me looking more like a relic from Wizard of Oz or something, supporting Ms. Truss, or should I say Elizabeth, what's her name? Mary Elizabeth Truss.
Is it? Well, that's something I didn't know.
But she was christened as Mary Elizabeth Truss, but has been known as Liz nearly all her life. So there we are. And someone's got to do it. So the great man that he is representing Mr. Rishi Sunak. Very interesting. Anyway, so we're going to see what we all think about that. So we're not really talking about financial advice as such, although, of course, the issues are very financial, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are. And let me just say, here and now, I don't know how I got shoehorned into this today, but all these lovely letters that I'm very proud of after my name, not one of them has anything to do with my political knowledge. So I have been browbeaten into this, so I'm going to do my very best to keep up with you, Paul. But isn't it interesting how this time, last month, we have this conversation about Liz and about Rishi, and we both nail our colours to the mast kind of indirectly during that conversation. And lo and behold, they both end up in the last two in the leadership contest of the Conservative Party. So call us prophetic if you like.
Pathetic.
Well, all that.
We'll see, won't we? Now, of course, one of the things I was going to say is that what you just said is also true of just about all politicians.
I'm not even going down that road.
Politicians don't have... Well, they don't have. If you take the start here, so Liz Truss, for instance, I only found this out last night. Do you know she's an accountant?
No, but
a qualified accountant married to an accountant.
Really?
Yeah.
That must be an interesting conversation in their household of an evening.
Yeah, she says, "Them fish fingers."
No disrespect. Bearing in mind, I'm in the company of one of the world's best accountants.
Oh well, what can we say? So. Yes, and Sunak, of course, had a first-class degree from Harvard, Fulbright scholarship, I think, and then got a top job in the city.
I can see where you're going with this one already.
Can you? So you're preemptive as well as...
I am. I can see where you're going with this one.
Come on, you're going to enlighten the listeners with... your...
Well, the social divide. We talked before the show about, working class backgrounds, middle upper class, the social divide, but we'll explore that as we discuss each candidate, I'm sure.
Yeah, so those of you who listened to the last episode of Financial Forte, I deliberately had a bit of fun at Mr. Alessandro's expense. So I was sort of setting him up for the weighty Truss sort of working class people made good, proper Conservatives against the privileged Fortes and Sunaks. But last time I saw Mr. Forte wasn't 223rd in the rich list, or he didn't have a wife who was actually richer than the Queen. Did you know that? Fact.
Well, I didn't know that, but that doesn't...
That's got you, isn't it? Eh?
Yeah, it doesn't change...
Shall I carry on and bash you a bit more now?
Doesn't change my view of things at all.
Doesn't it?
But you did. You did create a lovely kind of, I call them bookends. You've definitely positioned the first one on the last show, Paul, and set me up good and proper for today. So we'll see where this one goes and whether I survive it or not.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that, is there? A man as resilient as you, a man that's managed to live in Weston-super-Mare for many years, including in a council estate, has got to be able to survive against Paul Waite from Bridgewater.
Oh, yeah, you can't say I'm not anything other than working class, that's for sure. So
yeah, don't you show it sometimes? I mean, I was just looking at you leading those donkeys out at the beach last week, and I was just sitting there thinking, well, you can wrap a brick in silk, but it's still a brick.
We haven't even started this conversation yet. I already am being beaten up. But yeah, I'm very proud of my roots, actually, when all's said and done. And I do remember, one of the things I remember really clearly, Paul, when I was growing up, I was probably only about 5 or 6, and we're talking early 70s, when inflation was spiralling out of control, the country was in a bit of a mess. I remember my mum saying, if the Labour Party get into government, we're emigrating, I think she said, to New Zealand. So it's as well they didn't, otherwise I wouldn't be sat here today.
Why didn't you go back to Sicily?
Well, my ancestral home is actually Naples, and I'm not sure that's a place I'd want to live, really, unless I joined the mafia or something. So no, I don't know why she came up with New Zealand. I think it was just, I think it was a suggestion that it's just as far away as possible from...
What's your mother's background, by the way?
Widowed at the age of 29 with 4 children.
Where Anglo-Saxon?
Oh no, born in Burnham-on-Sea, actually.
Oh my life.
So real local. Yeah, so she's lived in the West Country all her life.
And her forebears?
So my grandfather was brought up in, I don't know where he was born, I think abroad somewhere from memory. She's going to shoot me for not knowing this, but lived almost his entire life in Dorset, in Poole, and ran a Masonic lodge. Very lovely man, actually. My kind of the elder statesman in the family, the one I always turn to for advice. So he lived down there for many years, and then obviously on my father's side, that's where all the Italian ancestors come from. So yeah, my mum's a real local.
And of course, you may not know this, or you may. One of the things, of course, I have in common with Sicily, being the son of a Manxman, is we are the only two. So the Isle of Man is its own territory, so to speak. Albeit has the Queen. Sicily is obviously part of Italy, but has its own. So we're the only two places in the world that use the 3 legs, or as the Latin is quo jacere stabit, which means whichever way whichever way you throw me, I land on my feet. The Sicilian one has a face in the middle of the 3 legs.
That I knew, but I didn't know about the.
So isn't that interesting?
The Latin phrase.
I did actually sit on a train once going to London, and I've got a Isle of Man tie with the 3 legs, and this guy came up and he said, "You either come from Sicily, the Isle of Man." Looking at you, I'm guessing the Isle of Man. He said. I said, yeah, that's very knowledgeable. I'm quite impressed with that.
To which you should have said "buongiorno," and then that would have completely thrown him.
He wasn't Italian. So anyway, the reason I'm saying all this is, I think Sandro was sort of talking about politics, but for me, the central debate today is, I suppose, what sort of world do we want to live in? So I'd like to explore. So I'm very clear as myself. I'm born of aspirational parents, albeit ones who increasingly make me despair because of their lack of empathy for mankind generally. I think they would be supporting a reintroduction of slavery, probably the way they've turned out. So my parents would be archetypal aspirational parents. Wanted me to do the best I could. So I was pretty much the captain of every sport team in my school, for instance, and my parents very much encouraged that. I was reading quite complicated stuff when I was 4 or 5 years old because my mum sort of made me, if you like. I was the only boy whose father encouraged to use a proper cricket ball and didn't mind if I hit it through the window. Literally, never once told me off. He's more interested in my cover drive than he was breaking the window. So that's sort of where I come from.
I think that's quite good. I think that's quite good parenthood mentality, actually.
Yeah, so do I.
Being the very best you can be, not worrying about the implications. I think that's kudos to your dad, I'd say.
Yeah. So how would you describe how you were brought up? Would you say it was similar? Were you from aspirational stock? Obviously, the other Fortes came to England and have done amazingly well.
Yeah, I think I'm really lucky actually, because when my late father was alive, he was running a very successful business in Weston-super-Mare, and it would be fair to say, we were quite an affluent family, so we'd be kind of medium class in terms of most people's view of us as a family. But then in a matter of 2 years, my mum has nothing. We're living in a council house, and that's actually how I was brought up. Spent nearly all my formative years in a council house. But I think the way I was brought up, Paul, was that I was grafting. From the age of 13, I was helping my auntie in my father's restaurant. I was working, 2 hours before school, 2 hours after, all summer holidays. I didn't have the kind of stereotypical run around the park with your mates or spend all this time in Nintendo Switch and all the stuff they do these days. I was rolling my sleeves up and washing dishes and serving food in a restaurant. So in many ways that taught me, and this is part of life that does trouble me now, is that I think we have lost, I talk generally, I think younger people have lost the ability to identify with what it takes to get by in the world. I think it's all too easy. And there's nothing, I don't think there's any substitute for a bit of hard work. So I learned over the course of 10 years that rolling your sleeves up and getting stuck in gets you an awful long way.
Good man. So I think suffering from listening to Sandro too much there in the last minute. So I'm going to give you listeners a break. So just picked a few songs I thought were sort of in fitting with in keeping with subject matter today. Kicking off with the Beatles and Taxman. So that's a bit of a clever play on tax there. The taxman's taken all I've got. Pretty true. If Sandro's not getting into power, that's pretty much how it's going to be. Austerity, humour will be banned, people will be made to wear black and grey.
You're in a very uncompromising mood today. I can see that little glint in your eye. It is always troubling me.
That'll be the last time you smile. You won't come onto the show smiling like that in a few months' time.
Well, it's because I won't come on the show again.
When Sunak's in charge. Anyway, so I thought what would be an interesting thing to talk about. So Sandro was just saying, while we were talking amongst ourselves, that he acts for a few leading politicians, House of Lords and Commons. And there as is true of two people who normally agree on most things, being Mr. Forte and myself. There is a divide in the Conservative Party, which is interesting itself, which I think leads itself onto a question. So, what does conservatism mean to you? What do you think the Conservative Party actually stands for? If you had to describe it, summarise it to someone, what would you say? What are the attributes of a conservative?
That's already a question that I don't think I know the answer to. But in my experience,
that's probably why you support Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, probably. But in my limited experience, there are two. For me, as a layperson, and I want to make it clear that I am definitely one of those people. I think that there are two, broadly speaking, political parties. One is socialist, which is all about dividing wealth amongst the larger population, and then there's this capitalist view, which is one that supports entrepreneurialism, going back to what I said earlier, working hard, being rewarded commensurately. So for me, the Conservatives have always supported this idea that corporate Britain, and we'll talk about corporate and what I mean by that shortly, I'm sure, but it's all about you reap what you sow. That would be the way I would summarise it as a lay person. I don't necessarily believe in supporting people who are not prepared to do things for themselves. Now, that isn't to say we shouldn't have a robust NHS, we shouldn't try to get homeless people off the streets. I'm not suggesting that for 1 minute, but there are lots of people who sit drawing benefits because the benefit system is too heavily weighted in favour of people and encourages some people to do nothing. So that bit I don't support as an opposite end of the view, and that to me is, to some extent, I'll be careful what I say because I don't want to make a bold statement, but for me that's a little bit more what the socialist view is. So that would be the answer to the question. Whether you agree with it or listeners do, I don't know, but that's just my view of what conservatism is.
So the weight opinion would be that Conservatives over time would be considered to be more reliable when it came to defence, foreign policy, securing the country, which I think at the moment, to be fair to the Johnson administration, which in my opinion stood for nothing, so he would be the epitome of an opportunist, someone whose policy was revolved around winning the next election and doing whatever it took, I would say. But to be fair, this Conservative government has led the world probably in its support of the Ukraine, which is something that makes me proud. So I think over millennia, Britain has been very robust when it comes to defence. And I think generally it's true to say that the Tories are trusted more to defend the country than Labour are. That's a fact, I'd say. And then just sort of generous things. Tories, party of low taxes. Socialist Party of higher taxes. I think traditionally Conservatives would be considered to be less empathic, not so caring about people at the lower end, so more elitist, perhaps creating a more sort of haves against have-not type society. And then, of course, there's stories within stories. So you take Labour, for instance. I was asked a question this morning, actually, by my coach, and he said, what do you make of Tony Blair's administration? And I said, although I didn't think so at the time, because I probably wasn't as balanced or fair, it's probably too party-centric. He's a Labour and I don't traditionally vote Labour. I think it could be argued, which is why I'm taking the stance I am over this particular leadership thing. Mm-hmm. You could argue that Gordon Brown understood business better than any chancellor in my lifetime.
You've raised a couple of good points, actually. The first one I would come back to you on there is that, and this is actually goes to the heart of why I would be a Rishi Sunak supporter rather than Liz Truss supporter. First of all, to your point about Boris Johnson positioning himself to win the next general election, I can think of a dozen prime ministers in the UK, and I can think of a dozen American presidents, for example, that spend the latter part of their administration positioning themselves for re-election. That is an unfortunate part of the political system. I don't agree with it. And one of the reasons why I like Rishi Sunak is because I think he's making tough decisions, a bit like Margaret Thatcher. Now, whether you like Margaret Thatcher, whether you didn't, I think she was one of the best prime ministers in this country, if not the best in the last 50 years. Yeah. And she made a lot of tough decisions when it wasn't popular to do so, but we were all the beneficiaries of those decisions. I don't think she was a politician.
I don't think the mine workers would agree with that.
Oh no, they wouldn't. Nor would the unions. But I think we have all come to learn. You've only got to look at all the train strikes going on and see that the unions still have power. We look back now at her administration, and go, you know what? On most things, she was absolutely right. Again, that's a personal opinion. A lot of people will disagree because I know she wasn't liked by many, but she did an awful lot for this country, and it was because she took some tough decisions. So that would be my comment in relation to yours.
Obviously, I can't prove this because she's lying in a graveyard somewhere. I am absolutely certain if Margaret Thatcher was alive and she was sat here, she would totally and utterly support my point of view over the tax situation, and she would totally and utterly not agree with you about Sunak. Absolutely certain of it.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come on to why later on.
All right.
Anyway, so I've lost my train of thought now. Sorry. So Thatcher, I think the thing that's worth pointing out here is something that I talk about maybe once a week. I'm always talking about if you drive down the middle of the road, you hit cars coming both ways. Margaret Thatcher actually said that. That was actually a Margaret Thatcher quote. So I think in Margaret Thatcher's case, she is hated maybe by a section of the country and the media. But she was also, she did actually get voted the best Prime Minister other than Churchill in the last 150 years. So, she did something right. Now, going back to the, you shouldn't stereotype politicians. And my own view, for instance, has flipped considerably. And actually, something I'll come on to about why my position in Liz Truss's is even more close than you might think. So, Gordon Brown was the person who introduced R&D tax credits. Fact. Mm-hmm. Gordon Brown was the person who introduced £10 million entrepreneurs relief. Fact. Who was the person who took it away? Rishi Sunak.
For lots of good reasons, I think.
For no good reason.
Well, I think I disagree. I would be the beneficiary of the old rule around business relief, entrepreneurs relief. Business asset disposal relief, as it's called now. So I would be one of those beneficiaries. When I come to sell my business, I'd love to realise £10 million and be able to pay 10% tax. I can't do that anymore. But I think there are lots of other reasons why it was done, which we can come on to discuss.
Yeah, so good. I think it's probably given me a few minutes to calm down after listening to that. So next we have something that's well, it's all right if you're married to the 222nd richest person in the country.
No, I knew you were going to play that card.
But here we go. Money, money, money. That was the wonderful Chester from Lincoln Park. Welcome back to Financial Forte. This is Paul and Sandra, and we're just getting heated up now. So I was just when I thought that we were going to have a nice friendly chat, I could just see the gloves getting warmed up. I got the Vaseline coming out onto my face. So I'm just going to do I think rather than get political, I'm going to tell you about my personal story and why, therefore, I am so opposed to Rishi Sunak and why I wrote to the Conservative administration said I would never vote Conservative again. And please do read my very good article, if I do say so myself, called The Betrayal of the Business Class by the Conservative Government, which you can see freely on LinkedIn. If you contact Aspen Waite, then so you can get a copy anyway. So I started Aspen Waite in August 1993. And I suppose, being an advisory type person, I do practice what I preach. So I do, I would say I'm a good role model in terms of how businesses should behave. And I was very conscious at a very early stage as to whether I was creating a capital wealth model or whether I was creating an income model. So in other words, was I basically trying to have jam today, spend it all, have a wonderful, wonderful lifestyle? No. So I decided that wasn't what I was going to do. I was going to live fairly modestly in the scheme of things and create wealth and build something that would be worth something in the future. Okay, so I embarked on that policy in good faith on the basis of the taxes that were around at the time. And of course then, there's a deep irony. So I was 7 years into Aspen Waite's life when Gordon Brown, for instance, introduced R&D tax credits. Very soon afterwards introduced the £10 million entrepreneurs relief limit. And so I, as someone who's always put everything on the line, showed full commitment, had my house as security, injected any money I had into my business to grow it, employed lots of people, therefore contributing masses of taxation to the exchequer. I had this clear vision of one day exiting, hopefully with a business worth multi-millions. And my reward for my patience and my long-term growth was to pay 10% on my return. Mr. Sunak comes along, 18 months ago, whenever it was, and destroys my life work. And it doesn't matter what you say to me, that's how I see it. And I'm so upset about it. That's why I wrote the paper I wrote, and why I wrote to the Conservative government and said, that's it, I'm never going to vote for you again. So from my point of view, everything that I worked towards has been taken away from me. And this is to come on to the other central point about this rather, sorry, I was going to say something rude then. This notion that somehow or other that tax rates go up equals more tax collected is provenly not correct. So when I was talking about entrepreneurs relief just now, you said, well, so I don't think, so you obviously don't agree with me. So I'd like to ask you why you think it's not okay for people who are self-made who have never... So if I failed 15 years ago, no one would have given monkeys, would they? I would have been allowed to fail on my own. The government wouldn't have said, here's a handout, Paul. Right? But I'm not allowed to create any wealth. So I could have taken all the money while I was going along. Right? It's very much like the debate you and I have about inheritance tax. So you've got two different types of people. You've got the people who spend it all now. You've got the people that save. So the people that spend it all now don't have an inheritance tax problem. So the people who save, which is what we should be encouraging people to do, in my opinion, they end up with this whacking 40% tax bill. And the people that were imprudent end up not having a 40% tax bill. So anyway, What do you got to say to that then,
Well,
Forte?
okay, I'll work backwards. So I don't actually disagree with anything you've just said. On the inheritance tax side of things, there are lots of easy ways to avoid inheritance tax. So that's an entirely voluntary matter for people as to whether they pay inheritance tax or not. Putting that to one side, I'm sitting here today as an entrepreneur, very much like you, cut from the same cloth, work really hard. So I agree with you in the sense that, yes, I'd love to see a £10 million entrepreneurs relief limit because that benefits me. But on the basis that 3% of the country employ the other 97%, I've also got to adopt a fairly balanced view, which is sitting here debating this today on behalf of the masses, and R&D tax credits and entrepreneurs relief and inheritance tax don't actually affect that many people as a general rule. So I suppose the difficulty for a prime minister is they have got to kind of come up with a balanced view, because if all they did was supported entrepreneurs like you and I, they would never win a general election, because the people who read the Mirror and the Sun.
Margaret Thatcher did.
Well, yeah, she did, but she came up with a policy that benefited the majority of people that worked. I mean, because of the taxation system that she adopted for a number of the generalists, and also going back to your point about defence and a good standard of living. We moved from a very, very high inflation, high interest rate environment to a very low one under her leadership. That's why I think people, why she got back into government, because of some of those more generalist policies. So I'm not disagreeing with what you say, but for me, somebody like I'm also a great supporter of somebody who's very, very clear, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. Mm-hmm. We know that Margaret Thatcher was very wrong on a number of subject matters, policies, but the fact of the matter is you are never going to be a popular prime minister with everyone. It's impossible. You're never going to get every decision right, but I do believe in decisive people. And if you look at Liz Truss, for me, she was a Remainer, now she's not. She supported British fighting in Ukraine, now she doesn't. She wanted to build on the green belt in the regions, now she doesn't. She wants to abolish the monarchy, now she doesn't. She wants to cut civil service pay in the regions, now she doesn't. And she says that her views have developed over time. I don't think a political leader can develop views over time. You've got to have a very clear vision and stick with it. Subject, of course, to things changing because they are imposed upon you. It's the indecisiveness of Liz Truss, not necessarily the policies, that I don't like.
Yeah, that's very, very, very interesting point. So thank you for those, because that sets up beautifully. So
that was the most patronising thanks for those thoughts I think I've ever heard.
So you will not be surprised to hear that I don't agree with you. Well, that's not entirely true. I think I would caveat that. So I was saying earlier about things that Liz Truss and I had in common. So Liz Truss was born to Labour activist parents. Her mother was in the CND. Father was a rampant left-wing socialist. Okay?
She campaigned against Thatcher as well, didn't she?
That's just I'm talking now.
All right.
Okay. Right. So it's true to say that at Oxford University, she was the president of the Liberal young students. She was of the Liberal Party. Okay. At the same age, I was also a Liberal. I wrote several big essays about embracing liberalism. And I think even to this day, it'd be interesting to, someone like Drew would think. I would say that I'm an unusual conservative in that respect, because I am very empathic. I do care about other people, which leads us on to a debate later. So I was a Liberal when I was 18, and I wasn't when I was 21. Right? Now, if I'm being honest, and I don't know if I want to, given that we're being combative, I went probably from being a Liberal to a Conservative in the first instance because I thought it was better for my pay packet. That's the honest truth, okay? So it wasn't... I wrote Liberal essays from idealism, from what I actually believed in my heart, and I voted with my pay... At the end of the day, I made a decision when I started working that voting Tory was better for me. Okay, and then my views have grown over time. Okay, that's how I would see it. So I think the fact that, I would say the fact that she came from the background she did, is to her credit. So I take the opposite view. I think for her to be criticised for having been a Liberal and now being what she is. Now, what I would say, because obviously, to some extent, although it's quite fun to throw salami at you, in a debate, it's important to come across as when I disagree with someone, I think it's important to say actually what you just said then is a fair point if it is, So what I would say is some of Liz Truss's past decisions would give reason to question her, to look at her and say, okay, it's interesting this, you were from this left-wing stock, you then were, quite significantly in the Liberal Party. One of the things, I'll do some bashing of my own candidate, she also was actively anti-monarchist, as am I, by the way, which is quite an unusual thing for somebody in my position. So I'm very unpopular in my family in that respect.
As am I. Very unpopular in mine.
So that's quite surprising. And do you know why that is? Because I don't like the concept that anyone is considered to be better than me or anybody else. I believe that everyone is equal and everyone should be given... So that's what I believe Conservatism is about, for instance, and life generally. Everyone should be given the same opportunity. It doesn't matter whether you're the poorest person or the richest person. Everyone should be encouraged to get to the top. And people should help other people along the way. That's what I believe in. So she was anti-monarchist, anti-Brexit. You're right. Mm-hmm. All the other things you said are correct. Now, I suppose it's difficult because you and I don't know Liz Truss and or Sunak. What is evident is that Truss has gone from being anti-Brexit to totally being on board with the Brexit process, right? So you could argue that shows she's a good team player, right? You might question her motivation or something, or her original thought process. What my contention would be, and we've only got 28 seconds before we get to the end of the first hour, so we might need to come back to this. So my contention would be to judge her on her track record. So in itself, what you said is fair comment, and then I think the comeback against that is let's look at the woman's record, and then let's form a view together, looking backwards rather than judgmentally looking forward, so to speak, if that's the right thing to say. Anyway, so that was the end of our fascinating first hour, Alessandro and Mr. Paolo. Hope you enjoyed that. Go and make a cup of tea, and we'll come back with great music and more debate. You're in fact listening to Alessandro Forte and Paul Waite on Financial Forte, and it is Wednesday the 10th of August, and we're sort of talking a little bit out of our normal sort of schedule-y thing, aren't we? So obviously Mr. Forte being... So yeah, this is a bit of how important is Sandro? How lucky are we to be listening to him? On Saturday, there I am, sitting in my hot tub, and where's Alessandro? In Chicago.
Yeah, I was. But I was working. I'm working at a weekend.
Oh, so what are you doing, Lord Sandro? I'm at a charity event.
No,
I'm just talking to the Queen of the Poor.
Shush. I'm very, very proud of the fact that I serve on the board of two big charities, one of which is based in Chicago. So I had to fly all the way there to sit for an entire day in a board meeting and then flew back.
But how important is that?
Very important. We have a $30 million endowment fund, give $2.5 million away a year to those that need it around the world, disaster relief and all sorts. It's very, very fulfilling.
Is that a global charity or an American charity?
Global charity. Based in America, but global. Very global.
So it just goes to show, you see, that you can be recognised. So Sandro, been internationally recognised as one of the best speakers in the world. Definitely, in my opinion, the best financial advisor I've ever met. But he gets it wrong. And I take great comfort that I may have been sat in my hot tub while he was in Chicago, but I'm right and he's wrong. So
I did wonder when that was going to come out of your mouth at some point. It's just surprising that it's only just into the second hour. I thought you'd leave that right to the end.
You know how it is, Sandro. I did actually put on LinkedIn that I was going to be easy on you, so it could be a lot worse.
Oh, well, I can't imagine what worse would be.
Oh, I can. Trust me.
If I may, though, Paul, I'll just come back to you mentioned before the break about better for your pay packet, and I don't disagree. I have got I want everyone to be aware that, for the record, I have no issue with people's background. Whether people believe that Rishi comes from, a more middle class background, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, whatever description you want to give him. And where Liz Truss came from, I don't really care. What I'm interested in is what do they stand for today. And my big concern, and I have spoken in confidence to a number of as you mentioned earlier, MPs and one or two that sit in the House of Lords. I think the big concern for a number of them, and they are completely divided, by the way, just to make this a really balanced debate. I think the kind of the jam today, which is an expression you used earlier, I think Liz Truss's view here is that we shove everything on a credit card and then we just hand the bill to our kids and our grandkids. What Rishi Sunak says is okay, but that's well. This isn't come from me. This has come from people within the Conservative Party who.
Oh, they're right, are they?
I'm not saying they are. I'm giving the view which divides everyone. One view is that making financial decisions now and paying for it later, and this is a commentary that I've had from a number of people, is not the right thing to do. Paying for what we need in this country from growth, which will come eventually, is the right thing to do. Now, there's another group of people who have a completely opposite view, where we have a problem to solve. It needs to be solved straight away. But I'm just going to add one little comment, and this is a personal comment, and it's a very general one. And that is, over the last 2 years, we as a society, have been bailed out by a government using billions and billions of pounds to basically sit at home doing nothing. It was called furlough. We all saved lots of money. What was the first thing that we all did when lockdown ended? We all went out and spent that money, and that's what's caused most of the inflationary issues that we have at the moment. So my big bugbear here is I don't think that the government should have to pay for the profligacy of the general population. And it is a general view because some people have been very smart with their money. But the reason we have the problems that we have to do today is because over the last 2 years, people have gone mad with the money that they were handed on a plate.
I must admit, I did. If I'd been wired up to a machine, I would have definitely shown a bit of spiking there.
I'm being deliberately provocative because I love seeing you change colour.
It's definitely working. So, So let's. So one of the things I would say is I am a true Democrat. I believe that people should believe whatever they want. So one of my best friends was very left wing socialist, and I probably enjoyed talking to him as much as anyone I ever have because he believed what he believed what he was saying, and if I asked him a question, he could defend it. So I respected him. There's nothing wrong with that. Margaret Thatcher's best friend was Frank Field. Frank Field, one of the most senior Labour politicians, very left-wing, and they got on like a house on fire. I used to go around and have tea with them every day, right? So you can get on with people who have different political opinions to yourself. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. It does rather make me cross. That's a good word to use. When you said things like, the Labour, the Tory. Well, that's their point of view, isn't it? We've all got different points of view. So one of the things I would say, I like to think that. So I'm a person who has an honours degree in economics, and I'm very proud of the fact. This might be a bit self-promoting, but I think that I practice my academia as well as anyone could in real life. So I understand all the background of economics because I've got an honours degree in it, and I've actually taken it into the real world, and I said, right, I'm going to go to fight in the real world and I've applied my economic knowledge, okay? So one of the things that I would say, we haven't got time to get into this, and it wouldn't be fair anyway, as Sandro is just a celebrity and a financial advisor and not an economist. So
I did say that right at the beginning, just for the record.
I am massively against quantitative easing. Massively, right? Hugely against the concept of quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? So quantitative easing is basically the weak way out of a weak economy, pumping artificial money into the system. So my contention would be that your mate, Mr. Sunak, right, in effect, so it wasn't just the furlough scheme, you also had bounce-back loans and C-bills, and I would put the word irresponsible into that. So you've got probably thousands of companies borrowing £50,000 that weren't even properly trading. So that itself creates a debt for, as you call it, future generations to have to settle, right? The furlough scheme, it's a difficult one. I don't think we've really got time to do it justice. Maybe in a future episode we might talk about the furlough scheme. I think on the whole, one should applaud the bravery of the furlough scheme and what it did. But it doesn't get away from the fact that the causal effect of those measures are in themselves overheating. Now, I wouldn't personally put it quite like you did, because what you're sort of saying is that, the average person sitting at home through no fault of their own, because they're not allowed to go out, basically had a period of enforced saving, didn't they? Because they couldn't spend it. And then when they were allowed to go out again, they've caused inflation. That's basically what you said. Well,
no, I did. I used the word general many, many times because I had to be very careful about what I said. I fully accept that some people needed financial support and got it. I think the big problem for me in this country, Paul, is that there are unintended consequences of every decision that ever gets made. So, for example, you've just raised the £50,000 loan facility for businesses. Loads of people abused that. That was no fault of the decision makers at the time, because they made it for all the right reasons. But we as a population, and again, it's a general comment, most people didn't do this, but some people did, and I know many people that did. They abused that system and they effectively robbed this country of money. And the problem with the system is there is not enough robust measures in place to stop those sorts of things happening. HMRC, are under-resourced. NHS is creaking at the seams. All they do is put more money into it. That isn't the answer. I mean, we could go off in 100 different directions here. The problem in this country is not Liz Truss's background, Rishi Sunak's, or the policies. It's the fundamental infrastructure of this country. That's what's broken.
Okay, so I'm rather pleased about this because, Mr. Forte and Mr. Waite, coming from a donkey riding background, I was a little bit, are we going to be able to talk for 2 hours? But we are, because we still have the crown jewels to come. So all the things I really want to talk to him about, I still haven't got to. So I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, so just in a couple of minutes before we get to the next song, on Monday, a wonderful lady called Olivia Newton-John died at the age of 73. For those of you who listen to my breakfast shows, you'll know that there are a selection of ladies that over time would have made it to a tea party with Paul. The likes of Julie Andrews. Trying to think. Gosh, isn't it terrible? I can't think.
Donna Summer?
Yeah, no. She's more of respect. Anyway, it's a bit sexist. We won't go there. So let's just say Julie Andrews. But one of the ladies that I admire, shall we say, would be Olivia Newton-John. So I was brought up by my father in particular to venerate the Commonwealth. So I've always brought up, Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians are the same as us, sort of thing, and so I've hugely enjoyed watching the Commonwealth Games. One of the things, be interesting to see what you listeners think. One of the things that's happened in the last 5 years, in particular, in my opinion, is the coming together of the Anglo-Saxon world. So I think one of the things that was very noticeable to me was the camaraderie between the Australians and the Brits, for instance. So that old sort of, we hated each other, they hated us. I think that they really appreciated being there, and I thought the crowd, to be fair, the Birmingham crowd was just amazing. I also think the games were brilliant for pro-union. So Alicia McColgan, for she actually said, when she came into the last lap against that Kenyan, the track was shaking from the crowd support. So I think the English demonstrated that they cared about the Scots as much as they did an English person, for instance. Anyway, so Olivia Newton-John taken away from us far too early. I know a lot of ladies, share the concerns of the wonderful, terrible thing that is cancer. So Olivia Newton-John, Australian, came to Britain, represented UK in the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest that ABBA won, came fourth actually, and had her own TV show, if I remember rightly. Probably most famous for playing Sandy in Grease, opposite John Travolta. The fact she was probably, guessing 35 at the time, and she's playing a part of an 18-year-old, somehow she got away with. But
I think we all remember the black catsuit, don't we?
Well, you do. I'm not so sexist as you. So.
Of course you do.
No, of course. Sorry, what suit is that, Cladro? So did you have any Olivia Newton-John memories? Or did you like her as a singer?
I did. Well, just as I had a poster of her on my bedroom wall, I think, at one point. So I think leave you to draw your own conclusions as whether it was her singing or the fact that she was pretty gorgeous back in the day.
Okay.
But yeah, she was a nice lady by all accounts as well.
So we've picked five. I've picked five Olivia Newton-John songs today, and one song where she's singing with John Travolta. I've picked the five ONJ songs that mean the most to you, to me even, me. Kicking off with Sam, which is dedicated to my eldest son, Sam, of course, which is why I love the song. That was the wonderful Olivia Newton-John. So a poignant aside to the fiery debate between the Sicilian sausage and the weight cider man or whatever.
The Sicilian sausage.
Saucily. Anyway, let's not go there.
Salsicce.
Anyway, so I think we, as I said to Sandro, we've still got the central debate to come back to. So, general point. So, I've done a lot of research on this over the years, and I'm very confident, as I would be. And I'm not saying that if I was in question time now that the audience wouldn't be booing at me and hissing and stabbing, nails in my dole or something. But it is completely untrue to say that increasing tax rates equals greater tax collection. It's a fact. It's not provenly. And in fact, if at my peak, if obviously I haven't researched properly, I could even told you what that rate was. From memory, I think the optimum tax rate proven globally is 28%. I think that's proven to be the optimum rate of collection, right? Now, what tends to happen, which is why I consider Rishi Sunak actually economically, and this is one of the points, it's got nothing to do, right, with me not respecting your opinion, right? One of the things I wanted to talk about today, which has got nothing to do with right or wrong, is my opinion is that Rishi Sunak and those people who support his opinions are not actual proper conservatives, because what he is, and it is why he is probably going to lose in the membership, because the vast majority of Tory members would agree with me that conservatives should be about lower taxes, understanding that. So even your point about entrepreneurs relief. So to me, if I over a period of 35 years, right, I don't know, let's say I create 100 jobs over 35 years, right, and I've contributed £30 million or something, I don't know, over the lifetime of my businesses, well, and then another £10 million of corporation tax. Well, that's, I've more than paid my debt to society, haven't I? So why I shouldn't be allowed, to benefit from a lower tax rate is beyond me, and I would consider it to be anti wealth creating capitalist to not to agree with that, you see.
Well, I come back to you on a few points. There's a lot of stuff I don't disagree with you on at all, Paul. Firstly, we do know, and this is our financial background, and I suppose the knowledge that we have in doing the day jobs that we do know that greater tax collection doesn't necessarily equal more revenue. Increasing tax rates rather doesn't necessarily equal more revenue. But there's a couple of points I would make. Number one, we all remember the big Starbucks debate a couple of years ago, and it wasn't just Starbucks, it was a number of other companies who we all agree don't pay their fair share. Mm-hmm. So when you take a general principle and say we're going to increase corporation tax, if you're not dealing with the really big fat cats, to use your word, then it doesn't work, because what you're then doing is penalising the real entrepreneurs, and I'll use that word without any fear of contradiction, the real entrepreneurs that roll their sleeves up and get stuck in. But where do you cap penalising entrepreneurialism? That's a completely different debate. Also, the thing I would say is that Rishi Sunak, and there is this belief that he's the tax raiser, but in actual fact, his proposals will lead to the greatest tax cuts since Nigel Lawson's budgets under Thatcher overall. In terms of the proposal, and one of the things we talked about offline is, but how long do those tax rates come in? Well, over two parliaments, effectively. But as we know, a government sets a bunch of rules, creates tax rates, and then the next one comes along, or even a new leader comes along. And as we know, Liz Truss is basically saying, no, we're not going to increase corporation tax to 25%. We're going to leave it at 19%. And that's why a number of entrepreneurs and a number of the Tories are behind her on this, because they believe the same thing that you do. I personally don't want to see corporation tax at 25%. What I do want to see is corporation tax remaining as it is, but I want to see corporation tax being increased for the really big organisations. But going back to what I said before, the problem is it's the infrastructure that is the issue. And so what we do is we take this broad brush approach to tax and we create a whole series of unintended consequences. And that is the root cause of the problem here. And I think this is why we're having this debate. I don't think, and over time we're only going to know whether Liz Truss is right, Rishi Sunak's right, I suppose, because things are going to unfold, in good time. But I also don't believe in putting stuff on a credit card, and that's an expression that I'm not using. It's one I've heard many people from television debates all the way through the House of Commons. There is great concern that by borrowing a huge amount of money, which is what we've all criticised, all us Conservative supporters have done over the years, when our fundamental problem with the Labour governments of the past is they go and borrow money and the Conservatives end up spending it, paying it back. So that's where I come from on this. And you're shaking your head again, but I think where I'm coming at this, because I am less well educated economically than you are, and I think I have I have much more moderate political views because I've only ever voted once in my entire lifetime. Because actually, when all's said and done, I no more believe in Liz Truss than I believe in Rishi Sunak when it comes to voting, because most of them don't do what they say they're going to do. They are fundamentally, politicians generally, as again a general comment, are fundamentally corrupt because they don't do the things that they say they're going to do, and they do things they don't believe in to win votes, to garner power, and it's the system that's wrong. Because and the only reason I probably sway towards Rishi Sunak is because he's being brutally honest about the problem we face at the moment, and that probably is the only thing that tips it for me. Because going back to what you say, good healthy debate is about recognising somebody else's point of view, not disagreeing what you say about Liz Truss, because I think there's a lot of fundamental principles that she stands for which I totally agree with. Same for Rishi, not bothered about their backgrounds, as I mentioned before. I just like the fact that he's facing up to a problem, and that problem is a very real one for today's society.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say to that, to be honest.
You shook your head. That you did everything you needed to do.
Well, no, there's so many things in there. So the Johnson administration, of which Sunak was, one of the key architects, was a very untypical Conservative government. So it was into public projects, much more in touch with the people, so Sunak himself was synonymous with increased public spending. He
was, but did Rishi Sunak support Boris Johnson in terms of every policy? Because I'm not sure that he did.
So I shake it. The reason I shook my head in particular was for that reason. Then this comment gets bandied around all the time by Sunak supporters. That he's brutally honest because he understands it, right? So we've got a situation where we've got global inflation, not just UK inflation. We've got global inflation, which has been exacerbated by a force majeure being the Ukrainian war, okay?
And COVID.
And COVID, and the legacy of decisions which were made. So, you could argue to some extent that Sunak well-intentionally created a mess or a situation, right? So if you take my opinion that money was artificially put into the economy, albeit for good reason, right? That's not for today's discussion. So for compassionate reason, because society as a whole didn't want to see people on the street, for instance, and they wanted to see people supported. But there's, as I often say to people, life's all about choices, cause and effect. So you choose to pump that money artificially into the economy for no reason, not for a productive reason. There's consequences down the line. So to some extent, he's inherited his own mess. Now, I'm not blaming him necessarily for that, but to turn around and say that, he understands the problem and he's responsible is just rubbish. So if you just look at, again, so let's take me as a good barometer, Sandra, okay? So the last 2 years have been very difficult for us. I feel like a businessman that's been through a tumble dryer, because our business in particular is all about collaboration and communication. And it's been impossible to do that properly, okay? So we're now in a situation where maybe for a bit of time now, a few months, I felt like the light switch has been turned back on again. People are starting to behave, semi-normally. So a government coming along and then increasing my tax burden in two parts. One is obviously with the national insurance, which is basically hurting me when I'm trying to recover. Right, that's how I see it very strongly. And then, I mean, quite frankly, if we want to do a bit of a history lesson, so until fairly recently, for all of my working lifetime, there were the concept of a large company and a small company. Right. So if we went back to, say, when Thatcher was around, or even probably 10 years ago, large companies on the whole pay tax at 30%, and small companies pay tax at about 20%. Right. It's a bit higher than that, but there was that big, of at least 7%, I think, in memory, as much as 10%, between 7 and 10% difference between what ICI paid and what a business, say, making £200,000. And then one of the things that and I've watched many budgets over my lifetime, is politicians don't understand business. That's the point, right? They don't understand business, and so when they talk about the economy and businesses, they actually don't understand. They don't understand the difference between Aspen Waite, Forte Financial, and ICI, right? And so what's happened, and I can't for the life of me understand why, is and it's been the Tory administration that's driven this. We've gone from what I think most people would have said was a fair enough system, like the larger companies should pay more than the smaller companies, to this drive towards equalisation, which we reached a few years ago, where all companies paid 20%, regardless of what size they were. Right now, so I'm saying, why did we need to do that? I think probably most. I don't know this. I haven't done a discussion with them, but I think most chief executives of large corporations would have been delighted to have gone from 30 to 25%, for instance. Right. So let's just park that up for a minute. So this comes back to sort of lack of understanding and lack of common sense, which greatly upsets me as a person who has to cope with reality. So I'm now in a situation where, I'd say we're in a recovery situation. My own firm and a lot of people, that I work with. You've only got to see the reality of that by the attitude of the revenue, who are now agreeing to things like 24-month payment plans, which is unheard of in my 40-year career. Never seen it before. So the government have told the revenue, look, there's people going to go bust all over the place. You need to be a bit more sympathetic. Okay, so I'm starting to hope about recovery. So how can putting corporation tax up from 19% to 25% be anything other than the most amazingly massive disincentive to want to grow?
Well, we've been down that road before, haven't we? And as I was listening to you, and again, don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I think the big issue for most people, and go back to what I said earlier, and I'm speaking as an entrepreneur now, so you'd expect me to be supporting corporation tax at 10%, for example. But the reality is that the vast majority of people are not entrepreneurs. They don't run their own business. And going back a number of years when corporation tax was higher, what's the first thing that large companies do? Leave the UK, which affects employment. So we had higher unemployment when all the big companies left the UK for shores afar. We then reduced corporation tax to encourage bigger companies to come back into the UK. So Apple moved their head offices back into the UK, for example, and employed 4,000 people in the process. So I keep circling back to this whole unintended consequence thing, that it must be, whether you're Chancellor or Prime Minister, must be almost impossible, because if you increase corporation tax, you get, heads of business on your back. If you reduce taxes, then you've got entrepreneurs, you've got other people complaining about it. I mean, you can't win. But I do agree, fundamentally, increasing corporation tax to 25% is not good for the likes of you and I. But I mean, where I don't know, where it's a difficult one. Don't agree with that as a principle. What I do agree with is the fact we've got to deal with the bigger problem, and that's why I like Rishi Sunak's proposals more than I like Liz Truss's.
So doing the final 5 minutes of the Paul and Sandro show today, which I think has been pretty good, really. I think, unfortunately, we're going to come to the end of the show, and I'm still not really going to understand exactly what it is you think Rishi Sunak is going to do, which is good, but which is frustrating. What I can do is, so I think that Liz Truss reducing the national insurance by 1% isn't in fact inflationary, nor is it against people at the lower end, supporting people at the higher end, because at the end of the day, as you well know, Sandro, the UK economy is based around two separate models, one being the private sector and one being the public sector. The public sector clearly is completely dependent for its financing on the private sector because it's not generating any revenue of its own. And that's one of the reasons I have a problem with a traditional socialist thinker who just seems to think that you can spend money on a project and it's coming from this magic money tree. But the magic money tree comes off the likes of you and me. Unless the private economy is booming and people are growing and creating jobs, etc., then there is no money, is there? So I think the fundamental difference between you and me, and which hasn't really come across very well, maybe because of how we've done it, is my contention is that what the country needs is, so if I ask myself a question, if I was the Prime Minister, what would I want the country to look like? I'd want it to be an aspirational country where everyone from the bottom to the top could all get to the top of the ladder. No one was better than anybody else. Everyone had the same opportunity to advance to the top, and that people were encouraged to take risks. There were incentives to help the risk takers, and we lived in an entrepreneurial society. Which and you hear politicians talk about this all the time, but they don't really understand what it means. They want Britain to be at the centre of the global market. They say we want us to be the logical port for innovators and all that sort of thing, but they don't actually understand in reality how to create an environment. So if you just look at the fact that Ireland, for instance, as you well know, has a corporation tax rate of 12.5%, which is why the likes of Amazon, etc., have their headquarters in Ireland, right? So there's already a positive disincentive not to be in the UK. So how can doubling the UK tax rate against Ireland be anything other than complete and utter folly?
Well, number one, Ireland isn't a particularly affluent country. Over the years, lower tax rates there haven't necessarily proven. I think back to clients who live in Ireland, and Ireland was, as a country, effectively bankrupt a number of years ago, and it's taken an awful long time to recover. For me, I think, I'm thinking back to 2017, and I remember a certain individual by the name of Donald Trump who was largely unpopular amongst not just Americans but amongst the politicians as well, but he said it the way it was. And one of the things I remember him saying in 2017 is we're too reliant on Russia for energy, and everyone kind of laughed it off and said no, you're absolutely wrong, and now look where we are with fuel prices. I think and the other thing I would say, Paul, is that when I grew up, going back to our childhood, and you remember this, my parents, my mum and my dad, God rest his soul, always said make it before you spend it. And it was something that was ingrained in me, that every time I made a pound, I'd save 50p and I'd spend 50p, but I'd have that kind of balance. And I think for me, without having done loads and loads and loads of research on this, so I don't know the political agenda, I don't know the granular detail, what I would say is that Rishi for me stands for someone who's basically saying we need to make it before we spend it, because if we spend it before we make it, we push inflation up. And everyone I'm speaking to at the moment is going, inflation's spiraling out of control, the cost of things, a pack of Lurpak butter, £9, can't afford it. So it becomes counterproductive. For me, Liz Truss, in conclusion, is not as decisive an individual, whether you agree with Rishi Sunak or whether you don't. Just to dispel a myth, he comes from a working class background. His mum was a chemist. He used to work there and in a restaurant, I believe. So to put 770 quid a year more in people's pockets encourages people to spend more. And I get the reasons why, from an economic recovery perspective, we need that. But the problem is it will push him. It will have inflationary issues. And I think that's the last thing we need. I mean, the Bank of England are talking about 13.3% inflation this time next year. That is catastrophic for this country in terms of economic growth and recovery. So that's kind of where I sit in terms of the political debate in conclusion, because I'm going to let you have the last word.
Yeah,
only because you can have it whether I like it or not.
Not really. I don't really have a lot of time, so I could make quite a scathing comment about, quite a sarcastic comment about your £770 thing. So I think in conclusion, I hope you enjoyed the show today. I think in some respects I feel it was a bit inconclusive because as we end the show, I don't really fully understand your point of view, which is quite cliche driven. Sorry, I don't mean that to be rude. I mean, no. So people say cliches, and I didn't really get to the bottom of, other than you repeating what is said, in the mainstream. I didn't really understand. Anyway, it is what it is. So let us know what you think. We're playing out today with 2 Olivia Newton-John songs, and we'll be back in 4 weeks. So goodbye, Sandra.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Paul.
Financial Forte, Financial Forte.